Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be sharing this, but here we are. I always knew my stepdad Kevin was a selfish, controlling piece of work, but I never thought he'd actually abandon me in a hospital just so he could go on vacation. That's exactly what happened. And when I finally stood up for myself, let's just say it set off a chain reaction I never saw coming. Let me start from the beginning. My parents divorced 3 years ago, and honestly, I wasn't shocked. They fought all the time, mostly about responsibilities. My dad worked long hours. My mom was technically a stay-at-home parent, but she wasn't exactly the nurturing type. She wasn't interested in cooking, cleaning, or even helping me with schoolwork. She was obsessed with her influencer career, even though she barely had a following. Her days revolved around posting beauty content, shopping for more stuff she didn't need, and going out with friends. Meanwhile, I had to fend for myself most of the time. Despite everything, I had a pretty solid relationship with my dad. When the divorce was finalized, they got joint custody, so I split my time between them. It wasn't perfect, but at least when I was with my dad, I felt seen. Then, Kevin entered the picture. My mom met him barely a year after the divorce, and suddenly, my life wasn't mine anymore. Kevin had 2 sons from his previous marriage, and from the moment he entered our lives, he acted like I was supposed to accept him as my new dad. The problem? He wasn't dad material. He was controlling, judgmental, invasive. He constantly criticized me, nitpicking everything I did. If I wore dresses, he'd sneer and say I looked too girly. If I let my hair down, he'd demand I tie it up. He had this weird obsession with making sure I acted a certain way, even though he didn't treat his sons the same way. And my mom? She let it happen. She was too busy trying to keep Kevin happy to care about what he was doing to me. At first, I thought maybe I was just being dramatic. Maybe I needed to try harder to fit in. So, I made an effort. I tried to be civil. I tried to bond with Kevin and his kids. But no matter what I did, I was always treated like an outsider. My stepbrothers constantly mocked me, invaded my space, and made me feel like I didn't belong. And Kevin? He encouraged it. If I complained, he'd just say, "That's how siblings bond." If I tried to talk to my mom about it, she'd sigh and tell me, "Kevin's just being protective. Give him a chance." It was exhausting. And the worst part? Kevin wanted me to call him Dad. I already had a dad. A real dad. But Kevin didn't care. He acted like the more he pushed, the more I just accepted. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Things got worse after they got married. Kevin started making all the rules. He dictated my schedule, my clothes, my social life. And my mom, who had never cared much about my daily life before, suddenly acted like his word was law. She spent more time with his sons than with me, treating them better than she ever treated me. I felt invisible. The only time I got a break was when I was with my dad. But he had to move for work, so my visits became less frequent. He knew things weren't great, but every time he tried to talk to my mom about it, she'd shut him down. I hated it, but I kept my head down. I told myself that if I just played along, things would eventually get better. Then, Kevin got promoted at work. And that's when everything fell apart. Kevin came home one day, grinning like he had just won the lottery. "We're going on vacation," he announced. A family trip. I'll admit, I was excited. Despite everything, I still wanted to feel like I belonged. Kevin and my mom picked the destination, booked the flights, and planned everything down to the last detail. I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, this trip would be the turning point. Then, the day before we were supposed to leave, everything changed. My mom and I were out shopping for clothes for the trip when a car slammed into us. It wasn't a massive accident, but it was bad enough. I ended up with a fractured arm and a concussion. I don't remember much about the crash itself, but I do remember waking up in the hospital, dazed, in pain, and terrified. Doctors told me I'd have to stay for a few days for observation. Travel was out of the question. And when Kevin found out, he was furious. I thought, for a split second, that he was worried about me. That maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment where he actually acted like a father figure. But no, he wasn't upset because I was hurt. He was upset because his vacation plans were ruined. He stood there, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had done this on purpose. And my mom? She barely said anything. I was stuck in a hospital bed, in pain, and all Kevin could talk about was how much money he was losing because of me. That's when he said it. "Well, she's safe here. The hospital has nurses and doctors. She doesn't need us sitting around doing nothing." I froze. I looked at my mom, expecting her to shut that down immediately. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at the floor. Kevin kept going. We already paid for the trip. It'd be a waste if we didn't go. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was 15, alone, injured, and they were considering leaving me behind. I turned to my mom, my voice shaking. "You're not seriously okay with this." She hesitated. Then, in the weakest, most pathetic voice, she said, "I don't know." That was when I realized. She wasn't going to fight for me. She was going to let it happen. I stared at my mom, waiting, praying for her to say something, to take my side, to act like a parent. But she just stood there, shifting uncomfortably, not looking at me, like she was embarrassed, like I was some kind of inconvenience. I felt my stomach drop. "You're considering this?" My voice cracked. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then Kevin stepped in. "Look, this isn't a big deal," he said, like he wasn't actively trying to abandon me in a hospital. "You're safe here. You've got doctors, nurses. You don't need us sitting around doing nothing." I wanted to scream. I was 15, injured, alone, and they were really about to leave me behind just so they wouldn't miss their vacation. "But you were fine dragging me along before." I shot back, my head throbbing. "What happened to this being a family trip?" Kevin shrugged. "Things changed." I turned back to my mom, one last desperate attempt to find a shred of humanity in her. "Mom," I said slowly, feeling my heart pound. "Don't do this." She clenched her jaw, and then as she sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "Sweetie," she said, "we've already paid for everything. It's non-refundable." That was her reasoning. That was the excuse she was using to justify leaving me in a hospital. I felt the back of my throat burn. "Are you serious?" I whispered. Kevin crossed his arms, looking irritated. "You're not a child. Stop acting like one." I wanted to throw something at him. I wanted to tell them both to go to hell. But before I could say anything, Kevin clapped his hands together, looking at my mom. "All right, decision made. We'll let the hospital know we're leaving." And just like that, it was done. They left. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting to wake up. Because this couldn't be real. No way did my own mother just leave me behind like a stray dog. No way she was really on a beach somewhere while I was hooked up to N4, barely able to sit up without feeling dizzy. But it was real. Because later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. "Mom, hope you're feeling better. We just landed. The resort is gorgeous. I'll send pics." She sent a picture. I felt sick. She was smiling in front of a fancy pool, drink in hand, acting like nothing happened, like she hadn't just abandoned her own child. I couldn't breathe. I texted back, my fingers shaking. "Me, are you serious? You just left me here." A few minutes later, she replied, "Mom, sweetie, I know you're upset, but we'll be back in a week. You're safe there. The nurses are taking great care of you." I felt my hands clench into fists. A week. They had actually left me behind for a whole damn week. I wanted to cry. Instead, I did something else. I called my dad. I hadn't planned to. I hadn't even wanted to. I hated asking for help. But at that moment, I didn't care. Because if I didn't reach out, I'd be completely alone. The phone rang twice before he picked it up. "Hey, kiddo," he answered. "What's up?" And that's when I lost it. I tried to hold it together. I really did. But the second I heard his voice, everything hit me at once. I started sobbing. "Whoa, hey, what's wrong?" His voice changed immediately, full of concern. I could barely breathe. "They left me." Silence. Then, "What?" I took a shaky breath, trying to explain between gasps. "Mom and Kevin. They left. I'm in the hospital. Car accident. They left me here. They're on vacation." Another beat of silence. Then, my dad said something I'll never forget. "I'm coming to get you." And I believed him. I barely slept that night. The nurses were kind, but they couldn't change the fact that I had been abandoned. I kept checking my phone, half expecting my mom to send another tone-deaf vacation selfie. Instead, at 5 a.m., I got a text from my dad. "Dad, landing in an hour. Be there soon." He had booked the earliest flight possible. He was coming. I let out a shaky breath, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Because I wasn't alone. Not anymore. By the time my dad arrived at the hospital, I felt like I had aged 10 years. I had spent the entire morning staring at the door, half convinced that something would go wrong, that he wouldn't come, that I'd be stuck here alone. Because that's how things usually went, right? But then, just as the doubt started creeping in, I saw him. He walked in, eyes scanning the room, and when he saw me, his whole face changed. "Jesus," he muttered, rushing over. "Are you okay?" I almost started crying again, because for the first time since the accident, someone actually cared. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Better now." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe they just left you here." "Believe it," I muttered. He shook his head, furious, but trying to keep it together. "All right, let's get you out of here." Getting discharged took a couple of hours. The doctors ran their final checks, made sure my concussion wasn't getting worse, and gave me a massive list of recovery instructions. My dad took it all in seriously. He asked questions, took notes, made sure he understood everything. And that was a foreign experience for me, because my mom had never done that. She had never paid that much attention to my needs. By the time we were finally out of the hospital, I was exhausted. My dad helped me into the car, making sure I was comfortable before pulling out of the parking lot. "You need anything?" he asked. "Food? Water?" I shook my head. "Just sleep." He nodded. "All right, we'll get you home first." And just like that, I had a home again. I woke up a few hours later, wrapped in the warmest, softest blanket I had ever felt. For a second, I panicked, because this wasn't my room. Then it hit me. I was at my dad's apartment. It was smaller than the house my mom and Kevin lived in, but it felt better, safer. I sat up slowly, my head still throbbing. That's when I smelled something. Food. Real, actual home-cooked food. I got up, making my way to the kitchen, and there he was, standing over the stove, cooking like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Figured you'd be hungry." I blinked. "You cooked?" He smirked. "What, you think I live off takeout?" "Yes." He laughed. "Fair. But I learned how to cook recently. Figured I should know how to make something other than eggs." I sat down at the table, watching as he plated some pasta. It was simple, but it smelled amazing. As he set it in front of me, he sat across from me, his expression turning serious. "So," he said, "you want to tell me everything?" I exhaled slowly. And then, for the first time, I told him everything. I told him about Kevin, about the way he treated me, about how my mom let him, about how I had never felt like I mattered in that house. I told him about the favoritism, the way Kevin's sons could do no wrong, the way I was always expected to just deal with it. I told him about how it felt, growing up in a house where I wasn't wanted. By the time I was done, my dad looked like he was 1 second away from driving to my mom's house and tearing Kevin apart. Instead, he took a deep breath, calming himself down. Then he said the words that changed everything. "You're not going back there." I blinked. "What?" He leaned forward. "You're not going back to them. You're staying with me." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "But custody." "I don't care about the custody agreement," he said firmly. "They lost their right to have you in their home the second they left you in a damn hospital." I swallowed hard, because I wanted that, more than anything. But could it actually happen? "Mom won't let me," I muttered. My dad's eyes darkened. "She doesn't get a say anymore." And for the first time in my life, I actually believed him. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. I knew it was my mom, but curiosity got the best of me. Sure enough, 5 unread messages. "Mom, hope you're feeling better. Let me know when you're ready to come home. Kevin says hi. We'll be back on Sunday. Can't wait to see you." And then, the last one. "Mom, why aren't you answering?" I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. She really didn't get it. She really thought she could just pretend nothing happened. Like she hadn't abandoned me. Like she hadn't made her priorities painfully clear. I locked my phone without replying. Because this time, I wasn't coming back. I woke up to even more messages. I should have expected it. My mom had never been the type to let things go, especially when she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted. Sure enough, my phone was filled with unread notifications. "Mom, why are you ignoring me? I need to know when you're coming home. This is getting ridiculous. Answer me now." I stared at the screen, a dull, familiar exhaustion settling in. She wasn't worried about me. She wasn't asking how I was actually doing. She just hated not being in control. I locked my phone again without answering. She didn't deserve a response. By the time I got up, my dad was already making coffee in the kitchen. He glanced over when he saw me, his expression instantly shifting to concern. "Everything okay?" I shrugged. "Mom's blowing up my phone." He sighed. I figured that would happen. I slid into a chair at the kitchen table, running a hand through my hair. "She's acting like nothing happened, like she didn't just abandon me in a hospital." My dad leaned against the counter, arms crossed. That's how she's always been. If something makes her uncomfortable, she just pretends it never happened. I exhaled sharply. What do I even do? He studied me for a second. Do you want to talk to her? I hesitated. Because honestly, I didn't. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to give her the chance to manipulate me into coming back. But at the same time, this was my mom, the woman who had raised me, who was supposed to love me, protect me, and care about me. Instead, she had left me behind. The weight of that settled deep in my chest. I don't know, I admitted, but I do know I don't want to go back there. My dad nodded, his expression firm. Then we'll make sure you don't have to. That afternoon, he made a call to his lawyer. And just like that, things were set in motion. He wanted full custody. And for the first time since the accident, I felt hopeful. A few days passed. My mom was still blowing up my phone, alternating between guilt-tripping, passive-aggressive comments, and flat-out demands. I ignored every single one. Then, on Friday, my dad's phone rang. It was her. He answered on speaker. Hello. My mom's voice was sharp. Where is she? She's here, my dad said calmly. She's safe. She belongs here, my mom snapped. In her home. My dad's jaw was clenched. Oh, now it's her home? Funny. You didn't seem to care when you left her in a hospital. Silence. Then, in a quieter voice, my mom muttered, You're exaggerating this. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Because of that? That was classic her. If she didn't like the way something looked, she'd just rewrite the narrative. And this time, I wasn't letting her. I took the phone from my dad and spoke for the first time. You abandoned me, I said coldly. And now you want to pretend it didn't happen? Sweetie. Don't call me that, I snapped. She fell silent. For the first time, I had the power. And I wasn't letting go of it. You made your choice, I continued. You chose Kevin. You chose a vacation. You chose to leave me behind. She let out a sharp breath. I was under a lot of stress. So was I. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging her to care. I was done. I needed you, I said simply. And you weren't there. I heard her inhale sharply, like she had just realized, for the first time, that she couldn't talk her way out of this. Finally, she whispered, What do you want me to do? That was the thing. I didn't want anything from her anymore. So I just told the truth. Nothing. And then, before she could say anything else, I ended the call. Hanging up on my mom felt different. Not satisfying. Not triumphant. Just final. Like I had closed a door that could never be reopened. I sat there, staring at the phone, waiting for the usual feelings to creep in: guilt, doubt, second-guessing. But they didn't come. Instead, there was only silence. And peace. I finally exhaled. My dad sat across from me, watching carefully. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I am. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No stress. No knots in my stomach. I wondered if I would ever be good enough for my mom to actually love me the way a parent should. Because I finally understood something. It wasn't about me. She had made her choice. She had prioritized her husband, her image, her convenience over her own kid. That wasn't my fault. And it never had been. The next morning, my dad and I went out for breakfast. It was simple. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet little diner with good coffee and pancakes the size of my face. But it felt like a fresh start. So he said, sipping his coffee. What now? I poked at my pancakes, thinking. I don't know. I don't want to go back. Ever. But I don't know how this works. Legally, He nodded. That's why we're handling it now. My lawyer's already working on it. After what your mom pulled, I have a good shot at full custody. Hearing those words felt unreal. Because for the first time, I had a choice. Good, I muttered. My dad studied me for a second, then leaned forward. You know, he said carefully, you don't have to talk to her again if you don't want to. I swallowed. Because I had spent so much time waiting for my mom to care. To choose me. But now? Now, I wasn't sure I even wanted her in my life anymore. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I need some time to figure that out. He nodded. Fair enough. And just like that, he let me decide. No pressure. No expectations. Just support. And honestly, that meant more than anything. A week passed. Then two. My mom still texted short, passive-aggressive messages at first. Then, when I ignored those, the guilt-tripping started. Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. We're family. You can't just cut me off. I never replied. I didn't know her response. And for the first time, she had to deal with the consequences of her actions. One night, my dad got an email from his lawyer. He read through it, nodding to himself, then turned to me. "Good news," he said. "Judge is moving forward with the case. We should have an answer soon." I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. "That's fast," I muttered. He smirked. "Guess the courts don't look kindly on parents who abandon their kids in hospitals." I snorted. "Yeah, imagine that." For the first time, the situation felt manageable. Like I wasn't trapped anymore. Like I finally had a future that didn't involve being treated like a backup plan. And honestly, that was everything. Then, a few days later, something unexpected happened. My stepbrothers texted me. Stepbrother number 1, "Dude, mom is freaking out." Stepbrother number 2, "Seriously, she's losing it." Kevin's pissed too. Stepbrother number 1, "You not coming back?" I stared at my phone, laughing. This was the first time they had acknowledged me since the accident. They hadn't asked if I was okay, hadn't checked in. But now that my absence was causing problems for them, now they suddenly cared. Pathetic. I typed out a response. Me. Nope. Have fun dealing with them. Then I blocked their numbers. Because I was done. That night, my dad knocked on my door. I looked up from my laptop. Yeah. He hesitated for a second, then stepped inside, holding up his phone. Judge made a decision. I sat up straight. "Already?" He nodded, then smiled. "You're staying with me." Hearing my dad say the words, "You're staying with me," felt unreal. I had spent years feeling like I didn't have a choice. Like I was just stuck, forced to exist in a house where I was always second to Kevin and his kids. But now? Now, it was official. I wasn't going back. I wasn't theirs to control anymore. I blinked, my brain struggling to process it. "That's it." My dad grinned. "That's it." I let out a long breath. I was free. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more trying to prove myself to people who would never care. For the first time in my life, I was looking forward to the future. And then, right on cue, my mom called. I watched the phone vibrate on my nightstand. Watched her name flash across the screen. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, my dad knocked on my door, his phone in his hand. She called me, too. I sighed. "What did she say?" "Didn't answer," he said. Figured I'd let her sit with this for a while. I smirked. "Savage." He winked. I try. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because my mom wasn't the type to accept losing control without a fight. And sure enough, an hour later, she showed up at the door. I knew something was up the moment my dad looked out the window and muttered, "Oh, for goodness sake." I stood up. "She's here." He nodded. "Stay inside. Let me handle this." I could hear the tension in his voice, but I wasn't about to just sit back and let her act like she still had a say in my life. So I followed him to the door. The second he opened it, my mom stormed inside like she still lived here. "You can't do this," she snapped. My dad blocked her path. "Legally? I can." And I did. She glared at him, then turned to me. "Honey, you don't have to do this. You know Kevin and I love you." I laughed. "Really? That's funny because the last thing I remember is you leaving me in a hospital so you could go sip cocktails on the beach." Her face twisted. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." I shot back. "You abandoned me, Mom. And now you're mad because you don't get to control me anymore." She exhaled sharply. "We were stressed. You were selfish." She flinched. For the first time, I saw real emotion on her face, like she had just realized she wasn't winning this argument. She turned to my dad. "You turned her against me." He rolled his eyes. "She's not a child, Melissa. She can think for herself." She scoffed. "And you're just letting her cut me out?" He crossed his arms. "She's making her own choices. And unlike you, I respect them." That shut her up. For a second, she just stood there, shaking. Then, finally, she turned to me, her eyes almost desperate. "Please, we can fix this." I stared at her. The woman who had raised me. The woman who had chosen her husband over me, time and time again. And I realized something. I didn't want to fix this. I didn't want to keep waiting for love that was never coming. So I took a slow breath and said the words I never thought I'd say. "I'm done." Her face crumbled. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I do," I said. "And you know why?" Because I finally realized something. She didn't move, didn't speak. So I told her. "You never chose me," I said. "And I'm finally done choosing you." Silence. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door. I watched her leave. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. I thought I'd feel worse watching my mom walk away. That there'd be some last-minute panic, some urge to chase after her, to fix things, to go back to how things used to be. But I didn't feel any of that. Instead, as the door shut behind her, I felt lighter. Like I had just taken off a heavy backpack I didn't even realize I had been carrying. The next few days were quiet. No more calls. No more texts. It was weird, at first. I had spent so much time reacting to my mom, tiptoeing around her moods, trying to earn her approval, waiting for her to act like the parent she was supposed to be. And now? Now, I didn't have to wait anymore. Now, I have got to live my life. And damn, it felt good. A week passed. Then another. My dad officially filed for sole custody. With everything my mom had done, leaving me in a hospital, neglecting me for years, the courts didn't even fight him on it. It was done. I wasn't legally her responsibility anymore. And that was the best feeling in the world. Then, one night, out of nowhere, I got one last text from my mom. "Mom, I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. She still didn't get it. She still thought this was about winning or losing. She still thought I had done this to her, like I had some grand master plan to hurt her, instead of just choosing myself for the first time. I sighed. Then, without replying, I blocked her number. For good. Life moved on. And so did I. I finished school, focused on my happiness. Slowly but surely, I started to realize something. I was so much more than the girl my mom had left behind. I was strong. I was independent. And for the first time in my life, I was free to be happy. Guys, let's listen to a story from Johnny H. that he had sent me over my Gmail. If you also want to share your story, you can do it via my email. Check it in description. Am I that a-hole for sabotaging my sister's wedding by releasing a swarm of genetically engineered wasps? My 34M younger sister, Beth 29F, has always been the golden child. Ever since we were kids, she's gotten everything she wanted. Better toys, more attention, and even the last kidney when our dad needed a transplant. I only needed half a kidney, but no, it had to go to her. Anyway, Beth was planning her dream wedding. Of course, this meant it had to be on my birthday, because why wouldn't it? She claimed it was the only available date at the venue, but I know she just wanted to overshadow me again. For context, Beth and I have a complicated history. I once caught her feeding my pet hamster a piece of steak, claiming she was teaching him to evolve. Another time, she signed me up for a pyramid scheme and then sued me when I didn't recruit enough people. This wedding date thing was the final straw. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I've been dabbling in amateur genetic engineering for a while, don't ask why, and I recently created a strain of hyper-aggressive wasps that are attracted to the scent of roses. Beth's wedding theme? An enchanted rose garden. I snuck into the venue the night before the wedding and released the wasps in strategic locations. I even set up small cameras to capture the chaos for future blackmail use. The day of the wedding was glorious. As Beth walked down the aisle in her overpriced gown, the swarm descended. Guests screamed, chairs toppled, and Beth's $15,000 dress was shredded by the wasps. To add to the drama, I heroically tried to save her by spraying her with a garden hose. But, oops, the hose was hooked up to the septic tank. Beth's husband, Derek, tried to punch me, but I'd already rigged his shoes with itching powder, so he was too busy clawing at his feet to do anything. My mom fainted, which was a bonus, and the priest was taken to the hospital with anaphylactic shock. Now, everyone in the family is furious with me. Beth accused me of being psychotic, which, honestly, felt like projection. My parents are threatening to disown me again, and Derek's family is considering legal action. But in my defense, Beth should have picked a different date. So, am I that a-hole for unleashing genetically engineered chaos on my sister's big day?